What is a Byrna? Is it a firearm? Is it effective? Let's find out. My name is Frank Latella, the owner and founder of Boynton Guns here in sunny South Florida. And I'm gonna explain the differences between a Byrna and a real firearm, specifically the Glock 19. Similarities, differences, and my opinion on whether you should get one or not. All right, so let's get started. So when it comes to the firearm or the Burna, any projectile, weapon, or device, we need to make safe, especially the actual firearm. So we're checking for a magazine, checking the chamber, and we are clear for this. So I want to start off with the obvious, right? The color. Now the Burna, they do make this in a solid black color like so. I chose to go with this one so it's clearly identified as not a gun. You don't want to be the person trying to defend yourself, pulling the Burna that appears to look like a gun, and someone else shoots you thinking that you're the bad guy. Or you pull the Burna out that looks like a gun, and luckily you don't have to use it, but the police end up coming. And if you own a real firearm and a Burna, maybe they're together. Now you have to prove which one you used. This is just my opinion on it. I think the orange safety one is clear that it's not a gun, but in your mind, if you say, well, I want the other person to think that it's a gun, even though it's less than lethal, that might be something for you to consider when purchasing it. Now, the statement I made, less than lethal versus non-lethal. This means that it's not designed to kill somebody, but it can, or can at least cause great bodily harm. So Burna recommends you shoot somebody in the chest. And if you hit him in the arm or the leg, that's okay, but center mass is a good target. Now, the reason for that, not only it's harder to miss when you're aiming for center mass, but it's less likely to cause great bodily harm. Hitting somebody in the eye, the neck, even the groin, you may have the intent to not try to hurt them, but by doing that, you could actually escalate that from a simple self-defense to maybe aggravated battery. You know, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a cop, but it's something that we have to think about. So starting with the color and understanding less than lethal doesn't necessarily mean it's not lethal. When it comes to the pepper ball, I'll explain that in a moment. When it comes to the pepper ball, you could hit somebody and maybe they have asthma. Maybe they have an allergic reaction to it that could cause them to potentially die. Now, these are things you have to consider, just like using a firearm. There could be a consequence against you if and when you have to use it. So we cleared this gun. Let me go through the basics of this, right? This is not a firearm video. It's for the Burna, but to go through. One of the biggest things is there's a slide, okay? This is recoil operated versus the Burna is CO2 operated. So when it comes to the Burna, let's talk about the size difference, okay? So when we have these two together, you have the length of the Glock about a little less than 7.5 inches and the Burna a little bit longer, about 8. Now, when it comes to the width of this, I'm not going to point them at me, but they're about the same width as well, although the Burna has a longer grip versus that Glock, meaning the width feels and seems about the same, but it's longer where it might feel as if it's a bigger grip. Somebody with smaller hands might have a slightly harder time holding it. However, there's not going to be any recoil on this. So as far as the size goes, it's going to be a little hard for you to conceal this. Might be a backup weapon for your home or for your vehicle, especially if you're traveling somewhere that you can't have a gun, or putting it in a bag, a purse, or a sling bag. But carrying this on your body, I don't think that's going to be something people will do on the daily, okay? So I'm just bouncing around here as I go. Let's talk about the cost, right? The cost of this is the Byrna LE, the law enforcement model. They have another one. They even have a rifle version, which I think is awesome. Maybe I'll do a video about that one day. But the cost of this, the MSRP, I believe, is $479. Now, of course, getting a firearm, different models, different cost. I'm a Glock dealer and a Glock armorer. $745 is the MSRP of the Gen 5 optic ready MOS Glock 19. So there is a cost factor in that. I believe the SD model, they call it, the slightly smaller one with less velocity for the Byrna, is a little bit less expensive as well. And I don't believe the color of it changes the cost. Let's talk about feet per second. With the Burna, you're looking at approximately 330 feet per second. Now compare that to a 9mm fired from a gun. It depends on several factors. We're looking at between 900 to 1,400 feet per second. Let's just say 1,100. We'll use that as our standard. 1,100 feet, that projectile travels in 1 second versus 330. Now, depending on which projectile you're firing, it could hurt. I'm gonna have somebody shoot me with it and really see what type of damage it does. So as far as the feet per second, clearly the real firearm, and that's no surprise to anybody, is gonna travel faster. Now, what about the effective range? So Burna says that their effective range on this is approximately 20 yards, which in a self-defense situation, you're likely not gonna have to shoot that far anyway. Effective range at that distance. And arguably, what we consider effective with this, I mean, you can shoot 100 yards, right? Now, it depends on weather conditions. It depends on the person's accuracy. But regardless, Burna or handgun, a civilian like myself and maybe like you are, we're probably never going to have to fire a far distance with this. So, you know, approximately 60-foot distance seems to be pretty good if that is the case. And I want to test the accuracy out as well. Now let's talk about the weight, right? The weight on this, I believe, is 23 ounces, right? Now I weighed it, but I also put the CO2 cartridge, a few of the projectiles, and the magazine on it as well. So a pound and a half, give or take. Now we're looking at the Glock, the approximate loaded weight with a magazine, about 2 pounds, give or take 30 ounces. So slightly heavier on this, but we do have a steel slide, of course, and most of this is a plastic, maybe polymer material, okay? So we're looking about the same on length and width, about the same on weight. Magazine capacity, 15 rounds standard on my Glock. And of course, since it's double stacked, you can use a higher capacity magazine. The Burna, only 5 rounds. Burna has the pull pierce technology so that there's not gonna be a slow leak with your CO2. Good and bad, right? Now, Burna put out a video.
One of the greatest features of the Byrna launchers is the pull pierce technology that allows a CO2 cartridge to sit in the launcher unpierced until you pull the trigger, simultaneously piercing the CO2 and firing the first round. But this does come at a cost of some velocity on that first round. So if you know that you're about to engage someone and have an extra second to respond, you can make sure that first round is at full strength by leaving the launcher on safe and pulling the trigger. This will puncture the cartridge and charge the system, meaning that first round you shoot will pack the most punch.
Now, I find this incredibly unsafe. For the Burna itself, it makes sense. But think about that. Holding a real gun and purposely pulling the trigger when you're not ready to shoot is a terrible thing, and it's an accident waiting to happen. So personally, I would, if I were to use this, I would sacrifice the velocity on that first round when it comes to safety, I talk to a lot of my clients, a lot of customers that come in, and told them that I'm going to be making a video about this Byrna. And in the back of my mind, I didn't want to judge it too soon. I wanted to see it, hold it, test it out, and do my own research before I make my opinion. So what I would say is, if somebody has good firearm handling skills, you understand the core rules to treat it as if it's loaded, to keep it in a safe direction, to keep your finger outside of the trigger guard until you're ready to shoot, to understand safe storage and what's beyond your target, all that stuff. If you have firearm experience, I believe then getting the Byrna is going to make the learning process a lot easier and safer versus you've never shot a gun or it's been a long time and you're really not that comfortable with it. So you get the Byrna first. From the videos I see, people see this as, well, it's less than lethal. It'll hurt somebody, but it's not gonna kill them. So the safety issues that I see with this, for example, there's no slide that moves. So in theory, I could cross my thumb over the top when I'm shooting and nothing's gonna happen. Now, of course, if I'm crossing my thumbs over this way, every time we shoot, that slide is going to be coming back, and there's a chance that I'm going to cut myself and possibly cause a malfunction if I interfere with the firing sequence. So if somebody picks up this Byrna and really can hold it any which way because there's minimal recoil and it might work for this, then that person decides to get a real firearm, I believe they're gonna have a hard time adjusting rather than starting with the gun and learning how to use this properly, or at least treating this as if it truly is a firearm with a functioning slide, okay? I just wanted to spitball a couple things about the differences between the two. We're gonna get hands-on and show you exactly how this functions. And of course, what I wanna say is, it might look like a toy, but it's not. This is a weapon. Yes, it's legal in all 50 states according to Burna, although the pepper ball that explodes may not be, but the device is. That being said, you must train with it. If at least bare minimum you watch some safety videos and you learn, but if you're gonna rely on this to protect your life, get professional training. At Boynton Guns, we do plenty of firearm training, and I am now offering training on the Burna, right? As a law enforcement firearms instructor, as someone who has been shooting for over a decade, I can clearly see that this, on the surface, looks like a good option, but you must treat it like a real gun, in my opinion. Learn how to use it. Maybe you don't live in South Florida, you live somewhere else. Contact a local gun range, shooting range, find a firearms instructor that is open to the idea of teaching you how to use this so you can have a good grip, a good stance, and you can be safe with it. That's the biggest part. All right, so we're in our training center now. We call it Strength for Combat, reality-based self-defense, firearms, knife training, and this is where we're gonna test out the Burna for stage 1 of our test. All right, so one thing that I found interesting about the way the box opens, something very minor, I just thought it was fascinating. So your average gun box, let's take Glock for example, you open it up, you just flip it open, and that's that. When it comes to this, it appears as if there's some child safety lock on it where you have to push and then pull, because it won't open just by pulling it. So just a tiny feature I thought was unique. So when we open it up, we see the Burna with 1 and 2 magazines. We have 2 CO2 canisters and 3 containers, one with kinetic projectiles for self-defense and training. That's the one that's gonna hit you, bounce to the ground, and it's gonna hurt. All right, then we have the training projectiles that would be the inert powder, the training version of the pepper ball that would hit you and cause a cloud of OC spray or gas, kind of like pepper spray. And then to practice outdoors, you have the kinetic that's going to biodegrade. So this is training only. You're not going to use this one for self-defense, okay? And then we have a little user manual and whatnot with a bunch of instructions on it, as well as regulations and liability and all that stuff. So you should definitely read through it. Now, what I found interesting was when we look at the box, it says legal in all 50 states. And I believe what they're referring to is out of the box, everything that you see in there. It does not come with, unless you order separately, the self-defense pepper balls. I don't think that would be legal in every state. That being said, you have to know the laws in the states. It's not a firearm, but it is a weapon, okay? So let's load this up and practice it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use the bottom of my magazine. There's a small tool here, and insert it right into that opening. Now, one thing just to be aware of, I am putting my hand in front of the muzzle. That's bad firearm safety habit to get into. However, this is not a firearm, but you just have to keep that in mind, bouncing from the Byrna to a real gun. Now I'm going to insert the CO2 bottleneck in and then screw this back on. I can do it by hand the majority of the way, and then I want to tighten it up with this. Use a little bit of force, but you don't have to go as tight as you can, just so it's about flush. If it's in a little further, that's fine, like this. So I'm going to take the kinetic projectiles, which once again is the self-defense rounds, but it's also good for training because you can reuse them. I'm going to press these in just like I would load a magazine. Be careful and even use some eye protection, safety first, because what I found interesting, the first time I did this, when I was pushing this in, it actually comes right out. So it's a fast way to unload it. But if you're looking at it, trying to load it, it might poke you in the eye. So I'm going to just put 4 in here. Well, actually, it has a capacity of 5, so I might as well pick this one up the ground and load it on up. Gun in a safe direction, finger off the trigger. It's on safe. I insert the magazine. I'm going to come up here. We're only about 2 yards away. So this is a close self-defense distance. Now, I'm not going to use my sights. I'm simply going to point and shoot. So I'm in my stance. It would help if I took the safety off. I'm used to shooting Glocks. What can I say? Safety off. Finger comes off the trigger when you're done, just like a gun. And those are the 2 shots fired. Now, if I need to unload, I'm going to shoot a little bit further at a distance, but if I need to unload, as soon as I'm done shooting, I'm going to flip that safety up. Ambidextrous safety, so we have it on both sides. My magazine comes out, and it's important that finger doesn't go inside the trigger guard. Magazine comes out. Now, initially, I'm tempted to try to rack, but there is no slide. So if we see there's a loaded chamber indicator where I could feel it. Now, you might not be able to see from here, but there is a kinetic ball in the chamber. So when I press this, watch it fall to the ground. And I'm still in the habit of doing a visual inspection and making sure it's on safe. Now, if I'm completely done shooting, I would then take my CO2 canister out, replace it with a fresh one so I can use it for self-defense. I don't want to keep a pierced canister in there. All right, so I moved back a little bit. We're at about 12 feet now. I'm going to do the same thing. This time I'm not going to forget to take the safety off. I'm going to shoot a little bit slower, and I want, come in a little bit closer. I want you to see the trigger pull. So accuracy, I'll show you on the trigger pull first, then we'll take a look at where I hit for that second shot. Watch the long trigger pull, then I'm going to compare this to a Glock. Now I'm normally right about here. That's normally that break on my Glock. I have to keep going. All right, that's a long trigger pull. I wasn't used to it the first time, and my reset is all the way forward. So now, if you can take a step back, that one, since I wasn't aiming, went a little bit too high. That last one at this distance, nice slow extension. Finger off the trigger. Finger off the trigger, and I'm gonna put it on safe. So let's take a small walk forward. Once again, this is a close distance, and I wasn't shooting far. We have 1, 2, 3, and that other one, when I was showing you the trigger pull, that one got lost. So I want to demonstrate the trigger pull on this dry fire, but of course we have to check for a magazine. Check. So on this Gen 5 Glock 19, this is the slack in the trigger, and right about here, listen for the click, that's my trigger pull. That's my reset. So on the Byrna, what happened was, on the Byrna, right now it's on safe, I pulled that same distance and thought, oh man, what happened? And I pulled it again, and I realized, no, the safety was off that time, but I wasn't pulling it far enough. So it's simply knowing and understanding the weapon that you're training with. If I decide to carry, if and when to carry that Burna, I'm going to make sure to practice with it more so I know it just as good as my Glock. All right, so the next test on accuracy is gonna be opening the distance a little bit, and this is gonna be done outdoors. On the box, Burna says 60-foot effective range, performance based on room temperature conditions. So effective range, room temperature conditions, meaning when I do this outdoors, I might have to move in to find that effective range. But going through about 20 yards, right, depending on how it's effective, that's a large distance. So even if what we did here, about 12 feet, even if we bring it up 20, 30 feet, it's likely still gonna be accurate then, and that's greater than your average self-defense distance. So let's test it outside. All right, so I set this up. We're gonna move back about 60 feet, which is what Burna recommends as their effective maximum distance. We have 11-mile-an-hour winds and about 55 degrees. In the beginning of the video, I said sunny South Florida. This is the one day out of the year that it drops below 60. Go figure. All right, so we have one here and one here. Obviously, with a handgun, it would be a tighter grouping, but regardless, it did hit this target, which of course is a narrow target. It's representing a target that's a little bit further away. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna shoot a little bit faster now, see what happens. All right, so this one, we had these two from the beginning, so we have this one and that one. So as far as accuracy, I'll give it to him. This is an accurate object, but of course the shooter has to have good trigger control and a steady hand, but in and of itself, not bad. All right, so let's put this to the test. First round is gonna be the inert pepper ball, so we could see if there's a cloud that forms. And the only reason that I'm not doing the real one is they didn't ship it with the real one, and I wanted to make the video sooner. Second one is the kinetic. So let's safety first. I do not recommend you practice this at home. Definitely felt it. Would it stop a motivated person who really wants to kill you? I don't think so, because I'm still standing. But I'm not gonna lie, it hurt. So after reviewing the video, I noticed that the inert pepper ball did not explode completely and did not give me that cloud that I was thinking would happen. And I wanted to know why. So I did some research. First thing was I went to the Burna website and noticed they have a law enforcement division. And I went to their site. So it's le.byrna, byrna.com. So you can check it out for yourself. I did happen to print this out. Direct or indirect effective impact. So here we go. The ability to indirectly deploy a chemical irritant by targeting a solid object near a subject puts the officer at an advantage, as no direct line of sight is needed. So that makes sense. You see a suspect go around a corner if you're a police officer, and you shoot the wall, and it will cause them to breathe that in without having to clear that corner because it's unknown territory. So the Byrna Pepper and Byrna Max chemical payload rounds shatter on impact, which it did. But maybe my body, I work out. I thought I had abs of steel, but maybe it was not hard enough to create that like a solid wall or solid structure would. Saturating a 3 to 5 foot area, causing temporary physical effects, such as involuntary closing of the eyes, intense burning sensation, breathing difficulty, and coughing. So what I gathered from that was, sounds good for some situations for law enforcement. For a civilian, I don't see that being an extremely practical thing. Sure, we can come up with scenarios and say, well, here would be a good time for me to do it. But actually shooting somebody in soft tissue, my stomach or even my chest, it's not going to give that effect. Now, maybe you get lucky and you hit the solar plexus or the collarbone. Then it might. If you hit the person's face because of the bone density, then it might. So I was a little bit bummed out by that, but I still see the advantages and disadvantages of that. In addition to going to the Burna law enforcement site and learning that, I decided to go on YouTube and look up other training videos that different people, whether they're instructors or just testing it out. And so there's actually two parts to this. First thing is, when the pepper balls did explode, the person was holding up a piece of wood, just like this. And that is what causes it to explode. So that kind of relates to the side on the wall. Now, maybe they were also holding up the wood because they didn't want to get hit. But there are also videos out there of grown men getting hit once and dropping to the ground. Mind you, those videos, they're standing a little bit further, whereas I was a little bit closer with more impact. Now, I'm not saying this to try to say, ooh, I'm tough. Let's think about it for a second. Some of the videos that you'll see, it seems as if they're playful. Someone gets a Burna, they're hanging out, and they're like, hey, I just got this. They shoot a can or a wall. Oh my gosh, you should do it. And they're laughing and they get hit and they fall because it's what they think they should do. But when I was getting shot with this, I was focused. And in my mind, I was actually playing the bad guy role. And it hit me, but I didn't move. So let's think about it like this. What actually makes a human fall from getting hit? Well, let's use Taser for an example. Taser is a manufacturer that essentially is that stun gun that shoots the barbs. And when there is that circuit, it locks up your muscles involuntarily, and people fall to the ground because they can't, it's not a pain compliance thing. They just lock up. If you're being shot with an actual bullet in the body, in the arm, you're gonna drop because of the loss of blood. There are videos out there of police officers shooting suspects multiple times, but they're still standing and fighting briefly until they fall. So that being said, if your life is in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, I'm not telling you what to do, I would shoot the face, the neck, or the groin in order to really stop them or cause that delay for you to then get out. So overall, I do believe the Byrna is a net positive for the self-defense industry. You have to decide if it's right for you. You are the weapon. You have to change your mindset and think differently and train and practice. Do not be a victim. Appreciate you watching. Comment down below. Maybe I got something wrong. Maybe you agree or disagree. I want to hear your feedback. Visit us soon if you're ever in South Florida. BoyntonGuns.com.